Sword in the Stone, Chapter 2. A good while after that, when they had been whistling and luring and following the disturbed and sulky hawk from tree to tree, Kay lost his temper. "Let him go, then," said Kay. "He's no use, anyway." "Oh, we couldn't leave him," cried the wart. "What would Hobbs say?" "It's my hawk, not Hobbs!" exclaimed Kay furiously. "What does it matter what Hobbs says? He's my servant." "But Hob made Cully. It's all right for us to lose him, for we didn't have to sit up with him for 3 nights and carry him all day and all that. We can't lose Hobbs' hawk. It would be beastly." "Serve him right, then. He's a fool, and it's a rotten hawk. Who wants a rotten, stupid hawk? You better stay yourself if you're so keen on it. I'm going home." "I'll stay," said the wart sadly. "If you'll send Hob when you get back." Kay began walking off in the wrong direction, raging in his heart because he knew he had flown the bird when he was not properly in Yarrick. And the wart had to shout after him the right way. Then he sat down under a tree and looked up at Cully like a cat watching a sparrow, but with his heart beating fast. It was all right for Kay, who was not really keen on hawking except in so far as it was the proper occupation for a boy of his station in life. But the wart had some of the falconer's feelings, knew that a lost hawk was the greatest possible calamity. He knew that Hob had worked on Cully for 14 hours a day over a period of months in order to teach him his trade, and that his work had been like Jacob's struggle with the angel. When Cully was lost, a part of Hob was lost too. The wart did not dare face the look of reproach which would be in Hob's eye after all that he had tried to teach them. What was he to do? He had better sit still, leaving the lure on the ground so that Cully could settle down and come in his own time. But Cully had no intention of doing this. He had been given a generous crop the night before, so that he was not hungry. A hot day had put him in a bad temper. The waxing and whistling of the boys below him and their pursuit of him from tree to tree had disturbed his never very powerful brains. Now he did not quite know what he wanted to do, but it was not what anybody else wanted. He thought perhaps it would be nice to kill something, just from spite. A long time after that, the wart was on the verge of the true forest, and Cully inside it. In a series of infuriating removes, they had come nearer and nearer, till they were further from the castle than the wart had ever been, and now they had reached it quite. Wart would not have been frightened of a forest nowadays, but the great jungle of old England was a different thing. It was not only that there were wild boars in it, whose sounders would, at this season, be furiously rooting about, nor that one of the surviving wolves might be slinking behind any tree with pale eyes and slavering chops. The mad and wicked animals were not the only inhabitants of the crowded gloom. When men themselves became mad and wicked, they took refuge there, outlaws, cunning and bloody as the gore-crow, and as persecuted. The wart thought particularly of a man named Wat, whose name the cottagers used to frighten their children with. He had once lived in Sir Ector's village, and the wart could remember him. He squinted, had no nose, and was weak in his wits. The children threw stones at him. One day he turned on the children and caught one, and made a snarly noise, and bit off his nose too. Then he ran away into the forest. They threw stones at the child with no nose now, but Wat was supposed to be in the forest still, running on all fours and dressed in skins. There were magicians in the forest also in those days, as well as strange animals not known to modern works of natural history. There were regular bands of outlaws, not like Wat, who lived together and wore green and shot with arrows which never missed. There were even a few dragons, though they were rather small ones, which lived under stones and could hiss like a kettle. Added to this, there was the fact that it was getting dark. The forest was trackless, and nobody in the village knew what was on the other side. The evening hush had fallen, and all the high trees stood looking at the wart without a sound. He felt that it would be safer to go home while he still knew where he was. But he had a stout heart, and did not want to give in. He understood that once Cully had slept in freedom for a whole night, he would be wild again and irreclaimable. Cully was a passenger. But if the poor wart could only mark him to roost, and if Hob would only arrive, then with a dark lantern, They might still take him that night by climbing the tree while he was sleepy and muddled with the light. He could see more or less where the hawk had perched, about 100 yards within the thick trees, because the home-going rooks of evening were mobbing that place. Wart made a mark on one of the trees outside the forest, hoping it might help him find his way back. And then he began to fight his way into the undergrowth, as best he might. He heard by the rooks that Cully had immediately moved further off. The night fell still as the small boy struggled with the brambles, but he went on doggedly, listening with all his ears, and Cully's evasions became sleepier and shorter until at last, before the utter darkness fell, he could see the hunched shoulders in a tree above him and against the sky. Wart sat down under the tree so as not to disturb the bird any further as it went to sleep, and Cully, standing on one leg, ignored his existence. "Perhaps," said the Wart to himself, "if Hob doesn't come, and I don't see how he can very well follow me in this trackless forest now, I shall be able to climb up by myself at about midnight and bring Cully down. He may stay there at about midnight, because he ought to be in a deep sleep by then. I could speak to him softly by name, as though it was just the usual person coming to take him up well hooded. I shall have to climb very quickly. Then if I do get him, I shall have to find my way home, and the drawbridge will be up, but perhaps somebody will wait for me, and Kay will have told them I am out. I wonder which way it was. I wish Kay had not gone." He snuggled down between the roots of the tree, trying to think of a comfortable place where the hard wood did not stick into his shoulder blades. "I think the way was behind that big spruce with the spiky top. I ought to try to remember which side of me that the sun is setting, so that when it rises I may keep on the same side going home. Did something move under the spruce tree, I wonder? Oh, I wish I had not. Oh, I wish I may not meet that old wild Wat, and have my nose bitten off. How aggravating Cully looks, standing there on one leg, as if there were nothing the matter." At this, there was a quick whir and a smack, and the Wart found an arrow sticking in the tree wood between the fingers of his right hand. He snatched his hand away, thinking he had been stung by something before he noticed it was an arrow. Then everything went slow. He had time to notice quite carefully what sort of an arrow it was, and how it had driven 3 inches into the solid wood. It was a black arrow with yellow bands round it, like a horrible wasp, and its cock feather was yellow. The 2 others were black. They were goose feathers. The Wart found that, although he was frightened of the danger of the foxes before it had happened, although he was frightened of the danger of the forest before it had happened, once he was in it, he was not frightened any more. He got up quickly, but it seemed to him slowly, and went behind the other side of the tree. As he did this, another arrow came whir and talk, but this one buried all except its feathers in the grass, and stayed there still, as if it had never moved. On the other side of the tree he found a waste of bracken 6 feet high. This was splendid cover, but it betrayed his whereabouts by rustling. He heard another arrow hiss through the fronds, and what seemed to be a man's voice cursing, but it was not very near. Then he heard the man, or whatever it was, running about in the bracken. It was reluctant to fire any more arrows, because they were valuable things and would certainly get lost in the undergrowth. Wart went like a snake, like a coney, like a silent owl. He was small, and the creature had no chance against him in this game. In 5 minutes he was safe. The assassin searched for his arrows and went away grumbling. But the Wart realized that even if he was safe, he had lost his way and his hawk. He had not the faintest idea where he was. He lay down for half an hour, pressed under the fallen tree where he had hidden, to give time for the thing to go right away, and for his own heart to cease its thundering. It had begun beating like this as soon as he knew he had got away from the outlaw. "Oh," thought the Wart, "now I am truly lost, and now there is almost no alternative except to have my nose bitten off,
or to be pierced right through with one of those waspy arrows, or to be eaten by a hissing dragon, or a wolf, or a wild boar, or a magician. If magicians do eat boys, which I expect they do, now I may well wish I had been a good boy, and not angered. The governess, when she got muddled with her astrolabe, and had loved my dear guardian Sir Ector as much as he deserved.
At these melancholy thoughts, and especially at the recollection of kind Sir Ector, with his pitchfork and his big red nose, the poor wart's eyes became full of tears, and he lay most desolate beneath the tree. The sun finished the last rays of its lingering goodbye, and the moon rose in awful majesty over the silver tree-tops before he dared to rise. Then he got up and dusted the twigs out of his jerkin, and wandered off forlornly, taking the easiest way, always entrusting himself to God. He had been walking like this for about half an hour, and sometimes sighing to himself, and sometimes feeling more cheerful, because it really was very cold and lonely in the summer forest by moonlight, when he came upon the most beautiful thing that he had ever seen in his short life. There was a clearing in the forest, a wide sward of moonlit grass, and the white rays shone upon the tree trunks on the opposite side. These trees were beeches, whose trunks are always most beautiful in a pearly light, and among the beeches there was the smallest movement, and a silvery clink. Before the clink there were just the beeches, but immediately afterward there was a knight in full armor, standing still and silent and unearthly among the majestic trunks. He was mounted on an enormous white horse, and stood as rapt as its master, and he carried in his right hand, with its butt resting on the stirrup, a high, smooth jousting lance, which stood up among the tree stumps, higher and higher, till it was outlined against the velvet sky. All was moonlit, all silver, too beautiful to describe. The wart did not know what to do. He did not know whether it would be safe to go up to this knight, for there were so many terrible things in the forest that even the knight might be a ghost. Most ghostly he looked, too, as he hoved, meditating on the confines of the gloom. Eventually, the wart made up his mind that even if it was a ghost, it would be the ghost of a knight, and knights were bound by their vows to help people in distress. "Excuse me," said the wart, when he was right under the mysterious figure, "but can you tell me the way back to Sir Ector's castle?" At this, the ghost jumped violently, so that it nearly fell off its horse, and gave out a muffled baaing noise through its visor like a flock of sheep. "Excuse me," the wart began again, terrified in the middle of the speech, for the ghost lifted its visor, revealing two enormous eyes, frosted like ice, and exclaimed in an anxious voice, "Well, what?" Took off its eyes, which turned out to be horn-rimmed spectacles, completely fogged by being inside the helmet, tried to wipe them on the horse's mane, which only made them worse, lifted both hands above its head and tried to wipe them on its plume, dropped its lance, dropped the spectacles, got off the horse to search for them, the visor shutting in the process, lifting its visor, bent down for the spectacles, stood up again, the visor shut once more, and exclaimed in a plaintive voice, "Dear, dear!" The wart found the spectacles, wiped them, and gave them to the ghost, who immediately put them back on, the visor shut again at once, and began scrambling back on the horse for dear life. When it was there, it held out its hand for the lance, which the wart handed up, feeling all secure, opened its visor with its left hand, and held it open. It peered at the wart with one hand up, like a lost mariner searching for land, and exclaimed, "Ha ha! Whom have we here? What?" And that is where we will pause.